expositor who come together to practice the Dhamma and listen to the Patimokkha. Also, in a few days, it will be the anniversary of our teacher, Lumpur Chah's passing away. It tends to be a time when many of his students, monks, nuns and lay people come together either at his monastery or in the branch monasteries around the world and reflect on his life and practice and teachings. And for many of us, that's a cause for strength of mind, you might say, to arise. Maybe it's one of the qualities that Ajahn Chah seemed to pass on to his students. That sense of determination and sincerity in the practice, which he himself displayed. But as you can read in his biography or hear those who lived with him, their stories and recollections, you can, or even just reading the translated talks that he gave, it becomes clear that even though he was somebody who was very determined, sincere in the practice, and we believe developed his practice all the way to the end, to Nibbana. At the same time, his beginnings were not that much different from us, in the sense that he was born into the world with his own strengths and weaknesses as a person. And that came out in many of his teachings, where he would talk about some of the trials and difficulties of his own practice, training his own mind, which always gave his teachings a certain authenticity. He wasn't claiming to be born pure or with a lot of bharami. He may well have had a lot of bharami, but he talked about practicing with his own mental defilements, finding ways to be patient with them and then ultimately overcome them. Sometimes with continuing struggles over many years. So he was a human being like everyone else, but he did have that faith in the Buddha and that curiosity to really understand the Dhamma and the desire to be free from suffering. And there is a place for wholesome or skillful desire in the Buddhist path. Not all desire is wrong or a mental defilement. There's the wholesome desire that comes from maybe recognizing the suffering of existence and looking for a way out. Just the same as the Buddha. And being born in northeast Thailand, in a rural farming community, like many of the great meditation masters of northeast Thailand, Lumpur Chah as a young boy certainly knew about suffering and the difficulties of life. Everyone in that society knew of difficulty because the whole region was poor, undeveloped, and people faced many hardships. So one of the stories was that when he first became a novice monk, when he was only about 9, one of the things that prompted him was just thinking about how difficult the life of a farmer was. And in those days, often the children had to help the parents with many physical tasks, getting tired, facing up to the elements. He said it was miserable walking along behind a buffalo, getting buffalo poo on you as you walked the buffalo or even ploughed the field. And there's one story of him helping his siblings to mend a hand mill. They would mill the rice, dehusk it using grindstones and a pounder. And I think that contraption broke. They were very simply made with wood and string, rope. And as they were fixing it, it knocked him, which hurt him. And he went stomping off saying, "That's it, I'm off to the monastery." And so he became a novice monk. And he sort of made the complaints that any child would. He had to go and water the various vegetables and crops that his parents were growing every day, which was hard work, hauling water. And he said, I had to water the tobacco every day, I didn't even smoke. So he's brought up in a community that knew physical hardship, very little help from the government, little education, healthcare, facilities. So he certainly had his own experience of suffering as a young man. And even the suffering of love. When he first went back home after being novice for a while, then he said he fell in love with another girl in the village in his late teens. And as you would, made plans to one day marry her and live together, only to find that she was taken away by his best friend, not out of spite, but just as an arranged marriage. She was farmed off to his friend, and there was no choice in the matter. So he even knew what it was like to have a broken heart as a young man. So he certainly didn't come from a very pure background, kind of born into the Dhamma and born into enlightenment. His enlightenment came through hard work, contemplating and understanding dukkha, and then eventually transcending dukkha. And that's one of the things you pick up from his teachings, is his understanding of the nature of dukkha, the dukkha of a human being, physical dukkha, mental dukkha, the hardships, the challenges of life, and also particularly the challenges of working with your own attachments, craving, ignorance, to develop the path to get beyond them. So after being a Tudong monk for a number of years, he finally settled at the forest that has become what Nong Pong, his main monastery. That happened in about 1954. So from then until his death, 1992, he established a monastery and taught very energetically, just like his own personal meditation practice, which he developed through great effort and sacrifice, first for himself. But then once he established the monastery, he displayed great sacrifice in teaching others the Dhamma. He actually said he got most of his wisdom from teaching others during that period, being the senior monk at Wat Nong Pong. That's maybe where he developed an appreciation of other people's suffering as well as his own, and contemplating the Dhamma in all its different facets as he interacted with Sangha and the lay community, which just kept growing and has kept growing to this day. His teachings always had this flavour of learning, looking, observing, contemplating to find out where dukkha comes from and what to do about it, how to understand and comprehend it so that one can actually transcend it. And he had his background, he had studied a fair amount of pariyatti, the scriptures and the texts, so he knew the basic framework of the Buddhist teachings, suttas, Dhammapada, as many Thai monks do. They learn these things when they're new in the monastery, can often recite Pali phrases off by heart, remember suttas and so on, which gives them a good grounding in the words of the Buddha. But then from his years wandering in the forests and staying with meditation masters, he also learned the skill of the meditator, how to calm his mind, how to develop mindfulness, keep the Vinaya, and then contemplate. So this theme of learning to contemplate runs through his teachings as well. You're coming to understand dukkha and its cause, and then contemplating to really penetrate those truths. But using the peace and quiet of the forest, the training in the Vinaya and the training in basic mindfulness practice as a foundation for developing wisdom, understanding. There's certain themes he would come back to over and over again, teaching the monks. So one of them was just this sense of learning to be one who's at ease with whatever situation arises, particularly in terms of 4 requisites that we depend on to live. He would encourage monks to be one who is easy, at ease. Whether there's a lot of food or a little food is offered, whatever kind of accommodation you have, whatever medicines are available, whatever robe cloth is available, just learning to be at ease and content with what comes your way. Not to be always fussing or worrying or desiring to get better things all the time. He'd say that's not beautiful for a samana. We're not consumers, we're not into finding more wealth. We're here to find nibbana, so we don't need to spend a lot of time seeking out more requisites as long as we've got the basics. So a phrase he'd often refer to is mak noi san dot, which means like one of few wishes and content. Because he said it would make your practice go very smoothly if you develop this habit. It may take time, as you ordain, it may take time to learn this habit of contentment and managing your desires and wishes for material things. But it's a worthwhile investment, because the more you do put effort into developing contentment with whatever comes your way, then the easier life becomes. You can sleep anywhere, get by with whatever food is there. You become somebody who is easy, he would say. You live easily. You're easy to look after, easy to support for the laity. And your mind is at ease so that you can develop mindfulness and insight and not spend a lot of time thinking about how to get the next requisite or more or better or different. This is one of the sort of founding principles that anyone who went to live at Wat Pah Pong when Ajahn Chah was alive would immediately encounter. Requisites were not lavished out everywhere, partly because there weren't a lot, because the surrounding society was poor, but also not to encourage greed and the frivolous use of requisites, but just to learn to get by with enough. Not to torture oneself, but not to indulge either. And this is another theme of his teaching, the theme of neither going towards Attakilamatthana yoga, self-torment, over ascetic in the practice without real wisdom, and not to go the way of Karmasukhalikana yoga, or is following desires, trying to indulge desire to get more pleasures, more comfort, more possessions, and so on. So straight away, going to live with Ajahn Chah or in his monastery, he learned to get by with enough and cut off a lot of aimless distraction of mind, fantasizing about getting other things. Or at the very least, you would see that those kind of desires quite quickly and easily, because if you're living quite simply in a monastery where the use of requisites is fairly frugal, then it does help you to see, and it highlights your desires when they come up. And they often center around very simple things, like getting the food you like, or drinks, afternoon drinks, or trying to get better quality cloth for your robes, or get some useful requisite for your kuti that you can't get. You could see desire, craving, and attachment arising based on very simple desires, simple wishes. And because they were fairly simple, maybe just to get an extra cup of drink, or to get a slightly better kind of cloth, different coloured cloth or something like that, then you could see and maybe cut off and abandon craving, because it was arising in a way that was easy to observe. A sense of humour could help as well, because when you see your mind obsessing over something that is really not very much at all, like just how to get another drink, or a different kind of drink, or a different coloured robe, or get a kuti, a better kuti if you're in a very old, fallen down kuti, say. If you stop and reflect on that, it sometimes can bring up laughter. You chuckle to yourself just how foolish your mind can be, obsessing over very simple things that, whether you get a better kuti or not, it's not going to change your practice that much, but your mind thinks it will, and becomes totally fixated on it, say, for example. But there were other reasons he taught that. He taught it so that monks could be easy to look after for the lay community. They weren't, so that monks wouldn't be a burden, always asking for things, wanting more things. And also for ease of movement. Sometimes we go and stay in other monasteries, and you don't want to turn up in a new monastery and from day one you're always asking for new things, better things, different things. So he really encouraged this sense of learning to be content with little and whatever comes your way. He also encouraged this sense of sense restraint, being one who is composed, restrained in whatever posture, whatever activity. And he would hold up examples of monks from the time of the Buddha, or monks who were disciples of Ajahn Man, who were practicing in a restrained, composed way, and praise them and remind us how inspiring monks can be when they are composed, peaceful in their behaviour, mindful, restrained. So he'd mention monks like, say, Venerable Assaji, one of the first 5 arahants who was walking for alms round in the village and was seen by Upatissa, who later became Venerable Sariputta. And Upatissa, looking at Assaji, just became convinced he must be somebody who's practiced the Dhamma, developed mindfulness, developed insight, because he had such a peaceful presence walking through the village, so composed, but at the same time radiant, really giving off a sense of somebody, a peaceful mind that has done the practice. So that drew Upatissa to go and question him about the Dhamma and find out about the Buddha. And as we know, become a Sotapanna in the process. Luang Por Chah would hold up Venerable Assaji, just this quiet figure of a quiet monk walking through the village on alms round, as not only practicing for themselves, being mindful, composed, but also as an inspiring sight for others. And people who knew Ajahn Chah and his Sangha, that was one of the trademarks of the Ajahn Chah Sanghas, that wherever they go, they tend to be composed, restrained, patient, and they know how to wait, they know how to be quiet if necessary, they know how to talk the Dhamma, but also how to be quiet, how to be patient, not agitated or demanding or making life difficult. And you see that quality still shows through today when you have events or times when Ajahn Chah monks come along somewhere. Often people notice how restrained they are. As I said, it's like a trademark of the tradition. Mindful, composed. And which is perhaps one reason why the number of his students grew, is because people felt these were people who were training, whether it's the monks, the nuns, or even the laymen and women who attended the monastery regularly. There's certain qualities and characteristics that people would notice, and one of them is this sense of peaceful, composed behavior. Another quality he encouraged was respect. Respect for the Buddha, respect for the Dhamma, respect for the Sangha, respect for the elders of the Sangha. The elders being those who have ordained earlier and have more experience, more knowledge from the practice. Showing respect through the practice of acharya vata, humility, acts of service, all the different practices we do as forest monks, where we train in the Vinaya. A big part of that is learning to show respect for senior monks and the Buddha Dhamma Sangha, the place. So even something simple like, I remember one monk being reminded he left a Dhamma book just, maybe it was on a rock or something just outside the meditation hall. While he went off to do something else, he put a Dhamma book there. And when he came back, someone said, "Why did you leave a Dhamma book, something that we should respect, out in the open where it could get, a bird could poo on it or it could get rained on? You should look after the Dhamma books out of respect for the Dhamma." Something very simple like that. Again, the flavour of the practice in the monastery was developing a sense of respect for Buddha Dhamma Sangha and the Vinaya, and that brings up many wholesome qualities and it makes you mindful. If you give importance to the Buddha Dhamma Sangha, the Vinaya training, the meditation practice, it will become something that you value, and then your behaviour reflects that, giving value to it, giving importance to it. So it brings up many other good qualities. And another teaching that he would give over and over and over again is this one: eat little, sleep little, talk little. It's similar to the teaching from the Buddha, the Apanaka Patipata, which is Indriya Samvara, restraint in the senses, Bhojana Matanyuta, moderation in eating, and Chah Kalyano Yoga, dedication to wakefulness and heedfulness. It was kind of like Ajahn Chah's own version of that, a very practical teaching, because when you live in a forest monastery, and especially in those days when things were very poor and simple, your main distractions are food, sleep, and socializing, conversation and socializing. So these were like the three enemies of your meditation. So he'd be constantly reminding the monks not to pig out, not to go overboard eating just for the sake of eating. He'd say we ordain, we eat our food so that we can practice. And we don't ordain and practice so that we can eat. We're not here to make money, get requisites, gather lay disciples. We're here to realize the Dhamma, realize Nibbana. You have to keep coming back to that initial intention if you want to really understand the Dhamma. So eating little, talking little, sleeping little. Anyone who's lived at Wat Pho Pong in the time of Ajahn Chah will be familiar with those practices. There's a morning wake-up bell at 3 a.m., which was often the dreaded bell, the most dreaded sound of the day. Because quite often you hadn't had nearly enough sleep, only go to sleep for a few hours, then already you're waking up. But the idea was to bring up effort in the practice, mindfulness, paying attention, not indulging. And the same with socializing. If you were doing a work project or cleaning up, washing your bowl, if there was a lot of chatter, then a monk might be dispatched to tell everyone to be a bit more quiet, because it was obvious they were becoming unmindful. It's understandable, when you've had one meal a day, you get a rush of energy and people often become very excitable, but then you lose your mindfulness. So often these very basic instructions were coming through. Why? Well, just to help people to bring up this quality of mindfulness, heedfulness. You might say that's another standard teaching of Luang Por Chah, is the emphasis on mindfulness, putting effort, and your effort is in bringing up mindfulness in every posture, every activity through the day. So he wasn't one who just emphasized a particular meditation technique over and over again, sort of repeatedly teaching that. He would teach, say, the recitation of Bhutto or Anapanasati from time to time, but is more developing the quality of mindfulness, clear comprehension, to get people out of that sort of fixed view that meditation is just something you do only when you're sitting cross-legged with your eyes closed in the meditation hall, and at other times you're not doing it. I think he seemed to emphasize making every part of your life part of the meditation. Because if there's one place in the world you can do that, well, it's in a forest monastery, where the place is quiet, the people are disciplined. You can make even the most mundane task of sweeping a floor or eating your food into a meditation. So you'd hear less about more refined states of jhana and samadhi. It's not that he didn't know about it or didn't have it, but he didn't emphasize it. He emphasized more the groundwork of the practice, developing mindfulness and clear comprehension in daily life, developing this sense of contentment with the requisites and being easy to look after, and the sense of developing effort, setting aside unnecessary distractions and putting forth effort into developing mindfulness, and then contemplating the Dhamma. So one teaching I heard early on and I've always found helpful is, he said that behavior that brings you to pay attention to the in and out breath is sila. There's different ways we talk about sila. The Vinaya training and all its rules and practices is sila. 5 or 8 precepts are sila. But he would describe sila sometimes in this way, a way of, in terms of developing meditation, it's that action that brings you to, or that behavior that brings you to focus on the in and out breath. And it just helps you to sort of look at your actions, behavior, what you're doing from moment to moment through the day and see, is this helping or is this going in the wrong direction, making me more confused? Because if you're using the breath as a kind of standard for measuring your behavior, well, say if you're chatting a lot unmindfully, you won't be aware of the breath. If you're indulging in sleep, you won't be aware of the breath. If you're eating your food without any mindfulness, you won't be aware of the breath, and so on. So it's just a principle you apply. There's obviously not a particular rule there, just that behavior which brings you to watch the in and out breath. But it helps you to determine or decide how to go about things, because you'll see very quickly when you're becoming unmindful and far away from the breath. So then you have to see how you can get back to the breath and what behavior will support that. So that means sometimes, talking little, being more on your own, sitting and walking. Sometimes it means being very careful around food and the use of the requisites, drinks and so on. Sometimes it means how much you're interacting with other people and for what reasons and so on. You're learning to reflect on your behavior and see what's supportive of the practice and what's not. And he said that's sila. And we tend to remember the textbook versions, like the Vinaya rules that we chant tonight, the Apposita, the Patimokkha rules, or the 8 precepts. But you can also use this way of reflecting just on your behavior, your actions, how you're spending your time, what activities you're involved with, and what attitude you bring to the different parts of your day, the different things you're involved with. And then he said, what that behavior which brings mindfulness to be continuous is what we call samadhi. So continuous effort to bring up mindfulness on the breath. And he was using the breath meditation as an example, and you could use another meditation technique, but in the talk I heard is what that activity or that action that brings you to have continuous mindfulness on the breath is samadhi. So how does samadhi, a state of calm, stillness, arise? You have to keep paying attention to the breath, bringing the mind to the breath, evaluating the breath, getting to know it, considering it, observing it. You keep doing that, well, after a while the mind becomes very calm, centered in the present moment with sati. That's samadhi. And the last one was that activity that brings you to see that the breath is impermanent, is wisdom. So it'd be the contemplation, the constant observing, contemplating the breath as it is. You come to be clear that the breath is something that's impermanent. It goes in and then it goes out. If it was permanent, you wouldn't need to keep breathing in and out. You just breathe in once, that would be enough. But it has to keep going on all day, all night, in, out. But it's that action or activity of mind that is observing the impermanence of the breath brings wisdom, understanding. Oh, the breath is like that. It's an impermanent phenomenon. It's a condition, a physical condition that constantly arising, passing away. And what is impermanent cannot be a self. in the sense of something that is lasting, independent, lasting by itself, existing by itself. The breath is a conditioned thing. And it's dukkha because it comes in and out. It's not satisfactory, it can't give us lasting life. If something goes wrong with the breath, we die. Or at least we get ill and then we die. It's dukkha. It can be painful. Sometimes the breath is painful, especially if you get a virus or an illness or you're injured. Sometimes from the external conditions like pollution or heat or cold. It's dukkha. So just that action, that behavior that brings you to contemplate the true nature of the breath is wisdom. This is one way he taught anapanasati and the development of sila, samadhi, panya. And he was such a creative teacher and he was so generous in his time. Well, he met many Sangha members and laity, so he had many, many skillful means and reflections to help people in different aspects of their practice. That was one particular one that I remembered and have used. And one of the last things I'll talk about tonight is just the emphasis on contemplation, observing the way things are. Because he did emphasize, say, the development of mindfulness and clear comprehension more than sort of talking about states of jhana, states of samadhi. You get these teachings like learning to contemplate. Whether you're peaceful, you contemplate it. Whether you're not peaceful, you contemplate it. You're not sticking rigidly to the sort of textbook description that you have to attain this level of samadhi and then do vipassana. But from day one, learning to contemplate your experience, because we can. As intelligent human beings, we can contemplate, even if our mind is not yet that peaceful. You can still develop some wisdom around your experience. So he encouraged that. So he'd say, if you're not peaceful, just know what it's like when you're not peaceful. Look at it, understand it. When you're peaceful, understand that. He wasn't encouraging people to attain or develop a certain state or a certain special experience. He was more rather encouraging them to develop mindfulness and wisdom and then just reflect on the way things are in their own body, their own mind. And out of that, of course, many good things come. Coming to see the nature of the body as impermanent, collection of elements that change, arise, pass away, ultimately go to their death and break apart. And then with the mind, just to see the changing nature of the mind. Feelings coming and going, thoughts and moods coming and going. And people would say things to him and he just, like they say, oh, I'm so sad, something's happened, I'm so sad. And he said, well, it's just a mood. Just watch the mood. Not get caught too much into the details. Not being insensitive, but just giving them a reflection on truth. That, a mood is just a mood. You feel happy, you feel sad, you feel angry, you feel worried. These are moods that arise and pass away. They're not a person, not a being. They're not me or you, mine or yours. They're just a mood or a mental state. It's just a mood. One lady went to see him and said her young daughter was really sick and maybe would die. And he said, yeah, we all have to die. Again, he's not being callous or insensitive. He's helping that person see the Dhamma in that situation. Or as we know, with monks, very sick, you'd say you either recover or you die. Just bringing people back to contemplate the truth in a situation rather than just saying what they want to hear or covering it over or denying, but just saying something brings the Dhamma back to that situation. So you'd encourage contemplation all the time. You contemplate your moods, ask yourself, if you are suffering, where does it come from, what's happening? Observe impermanence at work. Observe the dukkha of holding on to and clinging to feelings of pleasure and pain, mental states. Observe the dukkha in a human body. It's always there for you to see. And to see the lack of self in these things. You have these phrases that we've heard. It's just the way it is. You feel hot, you feel cold, you feel hungry, you feel full. It's just the way it is. You have a pleasant experience, puts you in a good mood, and then you have an unpleasant experience, puts you in a bad mood, but it's just the way it is. Developing this ability to maintain mindfulness and contemplate. So it's like keeping your mind in the middle, the center of experience, rather than always getting caught up into attraction or aversion, Kama Sukhalikana yoga on one side, Atthakilamattanu yoga on the other side. Rather stay where he said where the Buddha is in the middle of experience, where mindfulness and wisdom are operating. And your mind is just seeing the nature of things as they are. It's just like this, just like that. So I've talked a bit of Dhamma tonight. For the rest of the time we can carry on meditating.